Good morning and welcome. It is October 17th and here in cloudy Seattle, Washington. Welcome to fall. My name is Beth Chronister. I serve here as the assistant minister, and I'm joined this morning by Melody Moberg, our director of family ministries, along with our lovely bell choir and musicians and our tech team. It is good to be here together with all of you. A couple of announcements before we begin. For the safety of all, thank you for keeping your face masks in place throughout your time in the church building, and for, again, refraining from singing or humming along with the music or hymns in the chapel today. You're invited to enjoy coffee and conversations after the service, and you're welcome to greet one another mask-free outside. But if you stay inside, just keeping in mind that physical distancing practice, and most importantly, as you're eating your cookie or having your coffee, to do the drink mask, cookie mask dance. Halloween is on Sunday this year. We have on October 31st, and we're going to have fun together with a pumpkin day. So bring your carved or decorated pumpkins to display at the church and pumpkin baked goods to share. Watch for more in the e-news, and we're also going to have a reprisal of our amazing trunk or treat on the afternoon of October 31st. And so if you have ones who want to come trunk or treating, or if you are interested in decorating your trunk to hand out candy, please contact Melody and look at the gateway for more information. Newcomers and anyone who wants to learn about UUC or more about Unitarian Universalism, first off, welcome. We are glad that you are here this morning. And please know you're invited to an informal UUC info session with Laura Pepping in the Dix room downstairs immediately after each service today. So just bring your coffee right along with you. Those are the announcements I have. Welcome to worship. Welcome to University Unitarian Church. Let's start our service.
If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. Joseph M. Cherry. Please rise in body or in spirit to listen to our doxology, followed by hymn number 389, Gathered Here.
Good morning. My name is Melody Moberg, and I am Director of Family Ministry at UUC. Family ministry is a religious education framework that we are newly adopting this fall. The term family ministry speaks to our goals for supporting families holistically and collaboratively. Today's Time for All Ages has a teen audience in mind in particular. We'll be talking about accountability. In my seminary program, we're reading a book called Bonhoeffer's Black Jesus by Reggie L. Williams. This book is about accountability and transformation. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a white German Christian theologian who came to New York City for 1 year of study abroad from 1930 to 1931. Theology is the study of religion or the study of ideas about God. Bonhoeffer had very high standards for Christian worship and theology. He was disappointed by the white churches that he visited in the United States, and so Bonhoeffer connected with Black ministers in Harlem. In the Black church in Harlem, Bonhoeffer found meaningful worship and theology, and Bonhoeffer developed accountable relationships with Black ministers, most notably the Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, Sr. Through these relationships, Bonhoeffer became aware of the suffering of Black people under racism in the United States. And unlike many other white theologians, he took the evil of racism seriously. Through developing accountable relationships with Black ministers, Bonhoeffer changed and his ideas about religion changed. He was introduced to ways of thinking about God that come from the Black church. At the beginning of his year in New York, Bonhoeffer's theology was characteristic of a lot of German thought right after World War I. He was worried about white Germans like himself, and his ideas about religion combined Christianity with German nationalism. This is similar to thoughts that certainly could have aligned with the Nazis. But by the end of his year in New York, Bonhoeffer's ideas about Christianity and Jesus changed. He saw Jesus aligned with people suffering at the margins of society, with God on the side of people who were oppressed rather than being on the side of power and nationalism. This new theology changed Bonhoeffer's life. He returned to Germany and he fought against the Nazis as a church leader. His new ideas about God gave him strength and motivation for resistance. He had opportunities to leave Germany as things got worse and worse there, but he stayed intentionally because he believed it was his duty to resist the Nazis. He was ultimately killed for his beliefs and for his resistance. Our own symbol of Unitarian Universalism of the flaming chalice has roots in resistance against the Nazis as well. The image of a flaming chalice was developed by the Unitarian Service Committee to help Jewish refugees escape Nazi persecution on the eve of World War II. The design was put together to make paperwork for refugees from the Unitarian Service Committee look more official. The flaming chalice is based on lamps of holy oil used by the ancient Greeks and Romans on their altars, and the flame is meant to represent a spirit of helpfulness and sacrifice. I wonder how we might be accountable to the history of our flaming chalice. I wonder how accountable relationships can transform us and have transformed us already. And finally, I'm left wondering how our faith calls us to resist life-destroying systems today. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Patricia Gracer.
And I'm Doug Gracer. We've been members of UUC since our now young adult children were 5 and 8 years old.
We joined initially to provide them with a religious background that we thought would benefit them, and we did get that. But in addition, we became enmeshed in myriad aspects of this special place and its inspiring people. From multi-generational trips to build water projects in Nicaragua, to serving homeless teens meals in the U District.
From mentoring and co-leading coming of age to participating in climate action, our lives are so much richer than they would have been without UUC. Our participation and support have deepened our connections and our spiritual well.
Now that our children are grown and gone, our time and resources are less restrained. We've been increasing our commitment to UUC through time and funding because we know that every hour and dollar that we give helps support UUC to provide music, family ministry, social justice, care ministry, and a nurturing community and a welcoming space. We value all that we've received here, and we consider you all our partners in awakening spirit, nurturing hope, and inspiring action. Please join us in saying the words we say each week. This church is a community of ourselves. Its energy and resources are our energy and resources. Its wealth is what we share. When we contribute to the life of this community, we affirm our lives within it.
Following service, if you are in need of a listening ear to process something going on in your life, please know that a member of the care team will be available at the back of the sanctuary near where the bank of candles are. For a prayer this morning, I'm offering one from a colleague, from the Reverend Elizabeth Wynn, and this is one that I return to oftentimes when justice work gets hard. And it's entitled For When I Really Don't Want to Learn This. So would you please join me now in the spirit of prayer and of meditation. Spirit, I would really rather not learn this. Didn't think I needed to. I thought someone else could do it. Thought a leader was coming to do it. Thought the young people could do it. Thought the elders could do it, or the professionals. Or I don't want to learn it because it means letting go of something I hold dear. Letting go of being someone who knows the answers. Letting go of being someone who doesn't know. Letting go of the way I see the world. Letting go of how I might have to change. Letting go of certainty, of logic, of facts, of control. Of the myth that you can live on this earth and not harm. Or the myth I can't learn anything new. Help me to learn it, please. And then help me to live what I have learned and do right by the gift of being taught. To these words, I invite you to add the silent prayers and meditations of your own hearts. Blessed be, and amen. Our second hymn this morning is a hymn that is based on the practice of meditation, a form of it. It is entitled Filled with Loving Kindness, and I invite you just to remain seated and to feel the song through your breath.
May I be
so I really wish this wasn't the case. But some of my most profound learnings have not come from my successes, but from my failures and my mistakes. From those experiences in which, despite whatever good intentions I might have, I really miss the mark or I totally step in it. So allow me to start with a story. One I like to call That One Time I Lost a Body. In my final year of seminary, I worked as a student chaplain in a community hospital, and it was my first weekend on call, and despite my fervent prayers for a quiet weekend, my pager buzzed late on Friday night. I was being called to the ICU to attend what would become my first death in the hospital. It was a complicated case. A man was unconscious from an overdose, and estranged family members were on their way from out of state. At 4:30 in the morning, shortly after the family arrived and encircled the bed, the man did indeed pass away. I did my best to fumble through some prayers with them and filled out the various pieces of paperwork I thought needed to be filled out, got all the signatures where I thought they needed to be. And at the end of the night, in the end of the morning, really, I thought I got everyone where they needed to be, more or less. So Monday morning, I am riding my bicycle, wind is in my hair, feeling relieved to be on the other side of this first on-call weekend, when my supervisor calls. The coroner is here to pick up Mr. S, but he's not in the morgue. Do you have any information? I remember my stomach sinking as it dawned on me that not only had I mistakenly cleared the paperwork for the body to be released from the hospital when I wasn't supposed to, I had released Mr. S's body to be transported all the way to Iowa. Where he was at that point was anyone's guess. My mind flashed back to the previous week when my supervisor, trying to put her anxious new chaplains at ease, somewhat jokingly told us, "Look, it's not like you're going to remove the wrong kidney. You don't have that power. The worst you could do is lose the body." I felt nauseous. I did the worst thing you could do. Shame washed over my body, and I was hot and I was cold all at once. And that internal voice of perfectionism, it began to berate me for what I did. And I wondered, how could I ever go back? And would they even want me there? I did go back the very next day because, frankly, we had class and I had to. I shared the experience with the group, acknowledging my mistake and processing the experience of shame that followed. It was one of the most vulnerable and valuable learning experiences of my life. Not only because I learned how to not misplace bodies in the future, haven't done it since, but because I became more aware and attuned to the severity and the cruelty of my perfectionism, and how my fear of making mistakes had a deeper fear underneath it, a fear of losing belonging, and how these fears were working to keep me small. Paradoxically, after this experience, I became less fearful. I had already made the worst mistake and survived it, learned from it. And this allowed me to be more present, more courageous, and more humble in the hospital rooms that I visited. The fear of failure and the relentless pressures of perfectionism are so pervasive in our dominant culture. And I think this speaks to the power and the prevalence of shame in this society. We are steeped in it. And it's really no surprise in a culture which judges people's dignity based on their productivity and their worth based on where they land on hierarchies of race, gender, and class. And so there's a lot of shame that people experience. It is a universal emotion, and Brené Brown defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. The story of shame, in contrast to guilt, is not I made a mistake, it is I am a mistake. And the impacts on individuals and communities are varied and wide. This pervasive fear of failure and the need to defend against the discomfort and pain of shame, I believe it separates us from something essential in our own humanity. Our fallibility, our limitations, and all we cannot know. And this, in turn, can separate us from really receiving the full and complex humanity of other human beings. Perfectionism also blocks the ability to be innovative and take risks, lest it not work out. And this obstructs making necessary changes and experimenting in response to an ever-changing world. Furthermore, fear of failure, it stymies justice work. For working for justice requires taking risks, sitting with ambiguity and fumbling together toward a world not yet realized. But what I want to focus on most this morning is how these feelings of shame and perfectionism can become barriers to taking accountability in those moments when mistakes are made and harm is caused, whether that is in our families, our communities, or notably in the realm of anti-racism and anti-oppressive work. Shame becomes a barrier because shame blocks empathy. As an emotional and physiological experience, shame takes all the energy and directs it inward. That's what was happening to me that day on my bicycle. It was just... And this makes it hard to connect authentically with another, hard to listen, and it's hard to recall our own agency, which is essential for both making amends and imagining how you might change the behavior. Accountability is a word that I have heard used with increasing frequency in the past years, and it comes with a lot of baggage for folks, in part because people define it differently, and in part because accountability is undeniably uncomfortable. It is hard to hear when you have caused harm, intentionally or unintentionally. It's hard to share when you yourself have been hurt. But what is accountability? And what can possibly seed repair after damage has been done? I have learned that at its most basic, accountability is taking responsibility for your actions and the consequences of those actions. And there are overlapping layers to it. One can be individually accountable to one's own values, acknowledging that we will, without fail, fall short. This is the daily practice of accountability. Accountability is often also understood as a process that happens between two individuals after some harm has occurred. In this context, accountability might unfold through deep listening, honest and authentic apology, making amends when possible, and committing to making changes so that the harm will be less likely to occur in the future. Institutions can also be accountable to past and present systemic harm, acknowledging their role or their complicity in an injustice and seeking pathways towards restoration. Last week, my colleague Reverend John preached a powerful message about ways we as a congregation might become more accountable to the Duwamish tribe and acknowledge the fact that we live on stolen land, both through some form of reparations and relationship building. So importantly, accountability is not the same as punishment, and it's not about shaming people. And there's confusion about this. There's confusion about this because our culture is incredibly punitive and overly relies on punishment to right all wrongs, and all too often uses shame as a tool for controlling people, shame and the removal of belonging. Now, this isn't to say that people won't feel shame in response to being asked to account for their behaviors. It isn't to say that people won't feel shame, but that is different than being shamed. To quote Sonia Shah of the Ahisma Collective, a restorative justice organization, accountability is a fierce, radical, amazing way to choose to stay in relationship with each other, while acknowledging that harm will happen and that we each will harm each other at some point. Accountability is the opposite of punishment. Punishment says your humanity doesn't matter. We're going to lock you up and throw away the key. Accountability is the opposite. It says you still matter. This still matters. Our relationship matters. But something's been done, and we want to do something to repair it. There is no throwaway. No one is disposable. In my own work towards anti-racism, there have been many times in which I have fallen short of my values and times in which I have been called to account for something I have said or done. And each time it has been uncomfortable and tinged with shame and also ripe with learning. If I can breathe, if I can stay open and introspective and grounded in my core belief in the inherent worth and dignity of all people, including this one standing before you. 5 years ago, when I traveled to Standing Rock in North Dakota, I had an experience in which I became aware that I was acting out of my socialization and conditioning as a white person and falling short of my own values. I was volunteering in the donations tent early in the morning, and a number of donations had come in overnight, and I was busily shifting things around, trying to bring order to what I saw as chaos. In retrospect, I was likely trying to bring order to the overwhelm I was feeling internally. I hadn't stopped to ask what the process was or how I could be most helpful. I hadn't prioritized relationship building with the others in the tent, but instead I followed an internalized belief that I, a white person who had been there for all of 4 days, knew best what to do. My intention, it was to be helpful, but my actions were paternalistic. And I didn't realize it until I saw a version of myself and another person. A white man had driven in to donate a generator and asked the Lakota woman who ran the donations tent to take a selfie with him. I don't think he even asked her name. I saw her shake her head as he drove off and felt that pain of erasure, and I realized that I also had been too focused on my good doerness to see past myself. and I felt shame rising. And so I took a breath, and I recentered in why I was there. Not to get good white person points, but to do what little I could to support an Indigenous-led liberation movement that was sweeping the globe. I turned my attention outward. I listened, and that was where my true learning began. In her blog post entitled Dreaming Accountability, Mia Mingus writes, "What if we embraced accountability as a reflection of our undeniable, incredible, tender humanity, as a magnificent example of what it means to be human and flawed and in relationship with one another? What if we welcomed the quickening of our pulse and the beating of our hearts as signals of being alive and caring about what is most important to us, caring about our relationships with each other? What if accountability wasn't scary? It will never be easy or comfortable, but what if it wasn't scary? What if our own accountability wasn't something we ran from, but something we ran towards and desired, appreciated, and held as sacred? What if we cherished opportunities to take accountability as precious opportunities to practice liberation, to practice love? This is the heart of the matter. Accountability is not about shame or shaming. It's not about becoming somehow perfect. It is about the practice of love and of liberation, collective liberation. Across Unitarian Universalism, congregations, including our own, are discerning adoption of an eighth principle. The eighth principle is a grassroots movement supported and led by UUs of color and white allies, which invites congregations to make an intentional, explicit, and active commitment to anti-racism and anti-oppression work. The proposed principle reads, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions." I've heard some people wonder why an additional principle is needed when our other principles already include affirmation for the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and justice and equity and compassion and human relationships. Don't these naturally lead toward anti-racism? It's a fair question. But the reason behind the eighth principle lies in our history. UUs have made many proclamations about racial justice over the past decades, and too often actions have not matched words. And communities have fallen short, congregations have fallen short of building a diverse, multicultural, beloved community. Too many UUs of color have shared experiences of being pushed out of congregations or being told to conform to the overwhelming whiteness of many of our communities. There hasn't been accountability to sustaining the spiritual and structural work of anti-racism, which really takes all of us. There hasn't been accountability or ways to fumble our way back to each other when there has been hurt and harm. I don't know about what the exact right thing is for this community, in order to be part of accountably dismantling racism in ourselves and in our institutions. Perfectionism tells me that I should know. I should know the right thing to do. And because perfectionism tells me this, I am suspicious of it. I know there are multiple paths that we have and that we will follow in our hopes and our efforting to build the beloved community, to be on this journey which is non-linear and spans generations. However, I do know something. I do know that to do nothing, to harden our hearts, rather than enter into that vulnerability of pain, or to do nothing for fear of making mistakes, that this would be the wrong choice. I see the 8th principle as an invitation, a radical and fierce invitation to stay in relationship and to choose community. An invitation to become a religious community in which all might get more free from the destructive harms of white supremacy culture and the racism that pervades all levels of our society, our minds, and our spirits. Beloveds, in this hard, worthy, and spiritual work of liberation and restoration, hold close that first principle. Hold close the belief in the inherent worth and dignity. Let that be your guide, both in how you receive one another and how you regard yourself. For people grounded in their own worth and dignity, people defending the worth and dignity of one another cannot be stopped by shame or fear, at least for long. Beloveds, I believe in the power. I believe in the power of love. I believe in the power of love to transform. I believe in us. Blessings to each and all of you. Wonderful, fallible, worthy, full of dignity human beings. I love you. Would you please join me now in singing our final hymn, Come and Go With Me to That Land? And by singing, I mean clapping. Please rise in body or in spirit. My friends, it is my sad duty to share that we have the passing of one of our dear members, Judy Bedell, in this last week. Judy Bedell has been an incredibly active member over the past several decades. She was on the art committee. She was one of the co-leaders of organizing trips to go down to Nicaragua through the El Porvenir program to build wells. She was one of the founders of our Israel-Palestine exploratory group, teacher of Wellspring, teacher of religious education, and just a bright, bright light in our community. And she passed away this last Monday after struggling with Lewy body dementia in her final years. And I was with her on her last day of consciousness, and she was full of joyfulness. Laughter was one of her gifts, and we laughed and laughed together. Her memorial will be on January 29th here at UUC. More information to come. And so in memory of Judy Bedell, who's one of those people, there's this incredible gift of being a minister and that you meet people you want to grow up and become. And so one of the quotes she held very dear, she held very close, is a quote by Joseph Campbell. The ultimate aim of the quest must be neither release nor ecstasy for oneself, but the wisdom and the power to serve others. Go in peace, go in love, go in service, my friends.